Today, Iran and the United States are arch enemies. But this century-long grudge match actually started with a single barrel of underpriced oil and a very one-sided contract. In 1901, the Qajar government needed quick cash. The Shah gave British businessman William Darcy oil rights for almost all of Iran. The contract lasted 60 years. In return, Iran got £40,000 and 16% of future profits. This is where it all started. In 1908, the British struck oil in southwest Iran. When the news reached Europe, a company was set up in London to run the business. This was the birth of what we now know as BP. The British built a massive refinery in Abadan. It was like a country within a country. Foreign managers lived in air-conditioned villas, while local Iranians did the hard labor and lived in shacks. In 1950, some numbers made Iranians furious. The oil company paid over £36 million in tax to the UK government, while Iran got less than $16 million in total. Newspapers kept printing these figures, and the anger grew. Mosaddegh became prime minister in 1951. His first move was passing a law to nationalize the oil. The British immediately pulled out all their staff, and the Abadan refinery shut down. Things got very tense. By 1953, the US and UK blockade had tanked Iran's economy. With the country in chaos, the CIA and British intelligence launched Operation Ajax. They didn't want Iran joining the Soviets, so they decided to kick Mosaddegh out. On August 19th, tanks surrounded the parliament. Mosaddegh gave one last speech before the military took him away. The coup worked, and the Shah was back in power. The US saw it as a Cold War win, but for Iranians, it was the start of a deep hatred.
In the late 50s, Tehran got a makeover. The Shah filled downtown with new shops and imported goods. More women appeared in schools and factories. The government promoted these cafes and malls as modernization, trying to make Tehran look like a Western capital. In 1971, the Shah held a lavish 2,500-year celebration at Persepolis. He built a tent city to serve dignitaries caviar and champagne. Meanwhile, Tehran newspapers calculated the massive bill, while the costs of rent and bread on the streets were skyrocketing. Tehran was split in two. The north had malls, while the south struggled in cramped housing. Workers complained about stagnant pay and rising prices, while students protested against corruption and foreign influence. Soon, the unrest spread to every corner of the city. By January 1979, strikes had paralyzed the nation. The Shah appointed Bakhtiar as prime minister to hand over power to a civilian government. The deal required the Shah to leave. On January 16th, he boarded a plane, officially for a temporary departure. TVs across the city replayed the takeoff. Soon after the Shah left, Khomeini returned from exile in February. He was a Shia cleric who had lived in exile for years and the central figure of the anti-Shah camp. Huge crowds gathered at the airport with his portraits. As his convoy entered the city, the streets erupted with welcome back cheers. New posters and leaflets appeared everywhere, and his speeches filled the airwaves. On February 4th, Khomeini named Bazargan to lead an interim government. Under street pressure, the military withdrew its support for the old regime. Bakhtiar fled, the government collapsed, and Khomeini's appointees moved into the ministries to take full control. In October 1979, the deposed Shah Pahlavi went to the US for cancer treatment. When news reached Tehran, protests erupted. Many Iranians feared the US was planning another coup, just like in 1953, to restore the Shah to power. This fear gripped the city. This mistrust boiled over in November. A group of Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. They demanded the US return the Shah for trial. Khomeini backed the occupation, using the crisis to sever ties with the US completely. Quick side note, the 2012 Oscar-winning film Argo is based on the true story of 6 American diplomats' secret escape during this hostage crisis. US President Jimmy Carter tried diplomacy, but that failed. In April 1980, he ordered a secret mission to rescue the hostages. It was a disaster. A helicopter crashed in the desert, killing 8 US servicemen. The failure freed no one and humiliated the US. After 444 days, mediated by Algeria, the US and Iran reached the Algiers Accords, and Iran released all the hostages. With Iran in chaos, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein saw an opportunity. In September 1980, Iraq invaded, starting the Iran-Iraq War. The U.S. disliked Saddam, but hated Khomeini more. So, the U.S. provided Iraq with intel and money to fight the Iranians. In 1988, after 8 years of stalemate, the border returned to exactly where it started. Iran finally accepted a UN-brokered ceasefire. In a radio broadcast, Khomeini admitted that accepting the truce was as painful as drinking from a poisoned chalice. The war cost Iran dearly, nearly 500,000 dead and over $500 billion in economic damage. During the war, U.S. support for Iraq did not go unnoticed. It convinced Iranian leaders that Washington wasn't just the Shah's old boss, but an active accomplice in the deaths of their youth. This death to America sentiment moved from the front lines into every neighborhood in Tehran. In July 1988, the USS Vincennes mistook an Iranian civilian airliner for a fighter jet and shot it down. All 290 people died. Iran saw this as a deliberate attack, deepening the hatred. After the war, the U.S. shifted to long-term economic sanctions. Washington tried to cut off Iranian oil and isolate the country globally. This standoff lasted into the 21st century. In 2002, President Bush labeled Iran part of the axis of evil. Despite Iran's help during the early Afghan war, relations hit a new rock bottom. Then came the nuclear standoff. The U.S. suspected Iran of building nukes and led a global sanction campaign. Years of back-and-forth talks followed, but trust was never established. Over 70 years later, the coup, the hostages, and the sanctions are part of Iran's DNA. This history is why the hostility toward the U.S. remains so deeply rooted in Iran today.